Spiritual warfare is something that we're all going to experience one way or another. There's different phases in our life that is going to guarantee some type of adversity that we're going to be facing. So you can't stop it from happening. However, what you can do is you can increase your divine protection. I want to share a few things, a little bit of my experiences when I was going through some intense spiritual warfare that came in the form of very strange supernatural events. So we're taking it back to when I was in my teens, because that's when it was the most intense. I was going through a lot, and my shield was not as strong. I had a lot of open wounds, fresh from the traumas. Whether I have a nightmare or not, I know that I woke up. I wake up to sleep paralysis. I can't move, and also a sense of anxiety. And also, there was times where when I was going through my spiritual attacks in the night, I recall back in those days that it felt like somebody was watching me. I heard chanting and footsteps around my bed. Imagine somebody walking around your bed, and you can hear the footsteps as if a person is actually there. And then you kind of hear a little bit of, chanting, like you don't know what they're saying, but you could hear kind of like that. Really weird. And then you can sense the presence, the presence is there. And that's something that at a young age, I knew that I had this thing where I can sense the presence of the unseen. When you are able to sense what is going on, and when you're able to sense and see the unseen, you have got to have divine protection, and that is absolutely important. And that comes with activating the Holy Spirit. That comes with following the laws, statutes, and commandments of the Most High. You want to keep your temple clean as possible, not just from what you consume and what you eat, but also what comes from the heart. And that concept is actually Yeshua HaMashiach is, he said something about that. He said something about it's more important what comes from the heart than what you consume. But me personally, my interpretation of it, I think that it's still good to respect both concepts. You want to keep your temple clean, being mindful of what you consume, not just with food, but even content and different influences that you may encounter. But at the same time, you don't want to walk in fear or anything like that. You want to be the one you want your presence to shift the atmosphere. You know what I mean? And that's how you grow in power. The more you increase in spiritual energy, also, the more closer you get to God, the more you increase your divine protection, the more strong your presence will be, to the point that these type of attacks, like, it's not going to have much effect on you. You know what I mean? I'm not saying they're not going to attack you, because they're going to try, but it's not going to negatively impact you as much, because you are operating off of a higher frequency. And that's what happens when you are walking with God faithfully. That is a powerful thing. Practicing, fasting, incorporating that into your life. That's what I learned. But see, back in these days, when I was going through it, man, when I was going through some intense spiritual warfare, I didn't know this stuff. I didn't even understand what was happening. The only thing I could tell you is that I was very confused, because I realized that the moment that I started reading the Bible and trying to learn more about God for myself, it made the enemy want to attack me even more. And I didn't understand why. I thought God was punishing me for wanting to get close to him, and it made me feel like I didn't belong to him. It felt like rejection. But I didn't realize at the time that what I was doing was I was breaking generational curses by the simple fact that I wanted to get to know God for myself, which is something that isn't really often done. Not many people really truly know God. They go to church, they follow the so-called religion, so-called false religions and all that, right? But they don't truly know God and his essence. They don't understand divine order. So they don't understand the type of wisdom and knowledge that, we have been, searching for, and we've managed to find. We've managed to really find a lot of it. And I'm very thankful for that. I think one of the greatest things that, one of the greatest things I've done was pray for wisdom, because I needed it. I had no choice. I needed that. And I was humble enough to admit that I didn't know anything. So it got me to this point where, it's pretty amazing, honestly. And I love sharing what I've learned so far, and I love to learn more. It used to be a time when I regretted praying for wisdom. I thought it was like a curse, because it's like, it gets, the journey can get overwhelming. That pain of, going through so much at one time, and it can get a lot. So that's why I try my best to share as much information that I learn as much as I can, and just share it with you guys, because you never know. Some of this stuff could save a person's life, especially if you encounter a person and they understand everything you're talking about, and you realize you're not crazy. You're just very highly awakened and in tune with energy. This is a real thing. The world is influenced by, the spirits that linger around, both light and dark. The thing is, when you open your mind, when you open your consciousness, you're exposing yourself to all types of energy, both angelic and demonic. And you have to know how to have discernment, and to know which is which, and to know whether you're being attacked, or if you're being negatively influenced, or if you're being empowered by the spiritual fuel that you receive from a divine source, which is from God, right? So you have to know. Like, an example of that would be when you receive downloads and stuff like that. And if it aligns with truth, then you know who sent it. If it aligns with lies and deception, then you already know where that comes from. So, when you have these spiritual gifts, it is very, very important for you to really learn as much as you can. Always be a student, because this stuff it gets really deep, and you have to make sure that you have that shield. You have to have that divine protection. You have to constantly, the higher you elevate spiritually, the more you increase in your spiritual ranking, you have to increase in divine protection, because it gets crazy, And I myself, there was a time where my divine protection was not at its strongest, and I was going through these spiritual attacks, these anxiety attacks in the night, waking up to some shadows in the room, having this shadow figure wrapping its hands around my neck. It felt like they were trying to take my breath. It's almost like they just wanted to take my spirit, they really wanted to take that. And of course they failed. All glory to the Most High Yahweh, because they failed to do that every single time that I went through those kind of spiritual attacks in the night. Now, the last time I experienced this, it was around, how long ago? It was a long time ago, man. It was like, was it 2020, or is it before 2020? I don't know. It was like about 5 years ago. And the fact that I can't remember should let you know that that's how, ever since around 2020, 2021, right? Around that point, it's like I increased in spiritual energy and protection, right? And that in 2021 was when I started my blog. I started to really share my writing, for the first time in an actual public platform, which would be on my website. So, and then I just know that this correlates with my purpose. My divine protection correlates with my walk with God. The more people I help, I notice that it increases those blessings. A lot of times people, when they're looking for a blessing, it's always material stuff, but they don't realize how precious it is to have like a good night's sleep. Because there was a time I struggled with sleep, when I was going through that spiritual warfare, waking up to that, waking up to some craziness, that if I was to tell somebody, they're going to think they're going to think that there's something wrong with me. you know, hearing voices and footsteps and chanting and just weird stuff. It just sounds like somebody was putting a spell on me or something. Somebody was, or the fact that that place was so haunted, and the fact that I was reading the Bible for myself and really trying to know God for real, not just going to church and all that, because I stopped that. I stopped going to church a long time ago, around 2011 or so. So I didn't really do that. You know, I wanted to know God, like really, really know God. And the act of me doing that, being probably one of the only people really at that time that had that desire. Everybody else wants to follow religion, so-called religion, right? So I was learning, and I was learning for myself. And the act of me doing that, I was breaking generational curses by having the desire to know the truth. And the act of doing that, it also incites the darkness. You know, I was actually pissing the devil off, basically, because he knew that I was getting so close to unlocking so much wisdom, so much truth that would actually force the devil to take his ass out of there. You know what I mean? The devil knew that he was about to get evicted. The enemy knows who we were meant to become before we do. And so what they do is they try to attack you as much as they can, especially when you're young. And that is why I went through the most attacks in my early years. And as you can see, to develop an even stronger anointing, which comes from obeying divine wisdom, listening to the voice of God. And like I said, all of this comes together. All of this comes to fasting, you know, having to, the feeding the spirit, you know, and not allowing the flesh to control you. See, not many people understand these concepts, or they're not willing to do it. But for you guys out there that, you know, you guys are willing to take this path, because you might as well. I mean, if you're over here having, you know, divine dreams and visions and warnings, you know, spiritual downloads, if you're receiving all of these things, right, this wisdom that just comes from out of thin air, and then you know, the more you learn about yourself and why you're here and what you are here to do, this is how you know that you're chosen, because you accepted that calling. You know, most people don't. They're like, nah. And I'm not gonna lie, I was one of those people. I didn't want to do this. I was like, why you keep calling me? You know, just leave me alone. Go find someone else. You know, go find someone else, because that's not me, you know. Well, it turns out that it definitely is me, you know. Now I understand. Looking back at my life, I understand that why God would think that I'm a great fit for this, because a lot of times, you know, we think that, you know, we're not perfect enough to do this, but it's the fact that we're so imperfect that it makes us perfect. You know what I mean? You know, I like how that sounds, you know. It's like an oxymoron, but it makes sense. It really does. And that's basically what it is the fact that it goes back to what it says about qualifying the unqualified, you know. Somewhere in the Bible it says that. So there you go, you know. Just popped in my mind. But man, when I was going through that heavy spiritual warfare, this is what I gotta tell you. For you guys going through that, you guys might be going through like some supernatural stuff, and you wake up to that, what I just described to you, and you're probably wondering, why am I going through this? When, you know, why am I being attacked so much? The moment that I started wanting to get closer to God, started praying for deliverance, started to really search for the truth for myself, why is it that all of a sudden I'm going through these spiritual attacks? You know, you would think that things will get better, right? Why is all this turbulence taking place? The reason why that is because you just started stepping into a whole new thing. You know, you're starting to step into a different kind of, you know, it's a completely different level of consciousness that, you know, it's a shift in energy. What you're doing is you're creating a shift in the atmosphere, because you're doing something that most likely has not been done in generations. you're that person that is actually awakened to the fact that there's a lot of information out there that has been kept hidden, and you're the one who wants to find it. You're the one who wants to search and, unearth the gems, unearth all of that, right? And that's what that is. And so, yes, you're gonna be attacked, but you're being spiritually attacked because you have just became a threat to the enemy. That's why, it's not God. God is not punishing you for wanting to get close to him, because that's what I thought at first. But what it really is the fact that now you're becoming a threat to Diablo, because now Diablo, the last thing he needs is for you to start developing a very strong spiritual armor to where now he can't take advantage of you no more. It's very parallel to how, how the covert narcissists, they don't like when you grow. They don't like when you know your value. They don't like when you self-improve, and especially if they discarded you and then all of a sudden you just became so much, you became a lot better. You improved yourself. You upgraded your life, in every way. You look more vibrant. The covert narcissistic ex does not like that, because now they can't benefit off of your brokenness. And Diablo operates in the same way. Diablo, he needs you to be wounded at all times. He needs you to be broken forever. And that is why they continue to do what they do, because they want to keep you at that low vibration, because that is the only way that they can control you. And that's the same exact way the devil looks at you the moment that you decide that you want to get close to God, that you want to actually know him, on a personal and deep level. Not many people really search for the face of God in that way, And the fact that you have that desire to do that, especially if you're the generational curse breaker, if everybody else in your family is depending on a man-made religion to tell them this, and more than likely that man-made religion they follow is actually pagan and it's not even connected to the biblical truth. So you already know that they're not even on that same frequency. You're literally tapping into a whole nother frequency that is beyond what other people are in, that the people in your vicinity, they're not even on that. You know what I mean? You're trying to tap into something more powerful, and of course the devil is going to attack you, because the devil is trying to discourage you from unlocking all of the power that comes from really tapping into that higher realm of thought, And once I figured this out, it took me some time, but when I figured it out, it was so empowering to realize that, wow, now I can I understand this now, I really do. And I want you guys to really understand it as well, that when you go through these spiritual attacks, when you first decide, the moment that you decide that you want to change your life for the better, you want to stop allowing the flesh to have control over you, the moment that you decide that you no longer want to allow your addictions and all these different things, man, all these different, the things that are keeping you down, you are so sick and tired of it having that much power over you. The moment you decide that you want to change your life for the better in whatever way that means for you, that is the moment when the devil is going to attack you the most, because he wants to that he knows that is your most vulnerable time, because you're still not strong enough yet. You have yet to develop that divine protection, that spiritual shield. He knows you don't have it yet. So yes, he's going to go hard, They're already pissed off that they have one less vessel that they can use, because they know that the moment that you decide that you want to become a better person, that you want to be in total control of yourself, and the fact that you want to grow with God, that pisses the devil off, because Like I said, he can't. It's gonna come a time where he can't use you no more, and that's one less soul he can use, and one less soul that he can deceive and control and all that. It's kind of like when the narcissist loses supply. It's the same thing. It's not that they give a damn about you. It's just that they can't use you. They can't use you anymore. And even though it's just you, and you might think, well, they have all this other supply. Yeah, they do. But guess what? The more the merrier, right? That's the same exact way, with Diablo, because so that's why they go so hard at attacking you, because they're like, oh no, we can't let him go. No, you better go get him before he actually escapes this mental prison, before he escapes this matrix, It could be a he or she, I'm just saying, but yeah, that's what it is. You're trying to escape from that, and they can't have that. So yeah, it's going to be very intense. So prepare for that. If you're the type of person at this moment, you're looking to change your life, you're looking to improve, you want to have a real relationship with God, then you are going to face a lot of spiritual warfare. Because again, it's like being jumped out of a gang, That's how I like to compare it. The demons are going to they're going to really try to give you a good beating, spiritually. And sometimes you might actually experience that in some of these nightmares, so-called PTSD episodes and stuff like that. Yeah. It's all connected one way or another, but man, this stuff is so intense. But I'm telling you right now, I've experienced it. You're not crazy, It's just the mind is an amazing thing. That what the mind can do. It's amazing and it's scary because some of this stuff feels so real, and then you wake up to some supernatural shit, and then you're just like, wait a minute, I thought that was just a dream. Now you're waking up from that dream and actually seeing a shadow figure standing before you with its hands wrapped around you. It's like you feel like you can't breathe. You know what I mean? Now you might think maybe that's tied to my past trauma. You know what? I think you're onto something, but there have been cases where I've heard people share their testimonies and they had the similar kind of thing happening. So like I said, it is a spirit. It's a demon. It's a demon that tries to take the breath away. They're trying to take that breath, because that breath is the breath of life that God gave us. The enemy doesn't like the fact that we exist. That's what that is. But guess what? Check it out. We're still here. Our destination is rising higher and higher, ascending spiritually. That is where we're going. Okay, and I'm telling you that the more you take this path seriously, you're going to see the benefits. And I know that it's not an overnight thing, but I'm telling you right now that you have nothing to fear. And I know that the spiritual warfare and the PTSD put together, it can be very intense, and it can get, it induces anxiety, but you have to understand that, they are fueled by your fear. But the moment that you stop feeding them that energy, the moment that you step into your faith and your mental and spiritual fortitude, actually keeping the temple clean in various ways, not just what you eat, but also purifying the heart, activating the Holy Spirit, and upgrading your divine protection. Those are things to keep in mind when you pray and when you continue to grow spiritually, because it gets intense. But it is possible to reach that point where you feel like you have a peace of mind. I know that it sounds so, it's easier said than done. I understand that. You're thinking, oh, just follow the commandments? Really? No, seriously, not, and incorporating the fasting, and really, like I said, your heart has to align with it. And if you feel like your faith is slipping, you're going to have to pray. You're going to have to, man, it's a lot of different things that have to go on, but your heart, mind, and soul has to align with that faith. You can't be halfway with it. You can't, you know what I mean? Because if you have that seed of doubt, that's going to basically pollute the whole thing. You have to be all in. Okay, and I'm gonna tell you this right now. I had my doubts, you know. I had my doubts, I had my skepticism, I had all this stuff. You know, I was agnostic, atheist at one point in my life. And then I realized, hey, there's certain situations that I was in that I realized that this was spiritual warfare, and there was no amount of worldly knowledge that could answer those questions. So that's when I had to say, you know what? I humble myself before the Lord, and I ask him to give me the wisdom to help me get out of the situation, to help me regain my sanity, and also to help me achieve a peace of mind so that I could have actual good sleep. You know, once upon a time, I didn't always get good sleep because, like I said, when they attack you in the night, it's intense, you know. But like I said, I'm very thankful for where I'm at now because, like I said, the attacks don't stop, but you can change the way that it affects you, because basically those attacks will bounce right off of you. It's almost like it doesn't even exist. Why? It does exist, but it doesn't, because when they try to send it to you, it doesn't quite land. You know, it's kind of like, you ever look at a boxing match and you see the guy throwing all these punches, but you know, just because, like I said, the guy, he's not gonna stop punching you. But what we need to master is the art of not getting hit, right? So yeah, the opponent could throw all the punches in the world. Guess what? It doesn't mean a damn thing if it doesn't land. You know, if those hits don't land on you, then the only thing that the opponent is doing is losing energy, right? And that's literally like that's like Floyd Mayweather style of fighting. Tiring out the opponent, right? And then they get so mad because no matter how hard they try to land a hit, they just can't seem to do it. And even if they do, which is very rare, it's like, it feels like nothing, you know, because your shield, your barrier, your spiritual shield is very strong. But that comes with the work, that comes with the dedication that you put into your spiritual walk, and really mastering how to have control of your mind and how to have self-control, discipline, and all these things, and not allowing the flesh to control you, not allowing temptations to overrule you, because in reality, temptations were never your desire, because if it was, why did they have to make you want that? Why do they have to convince you that, hey, this is what you want, right? No, it's not. They want you to want that, because that's how they take control of you. That's how they're able to conquer you, and so that they can enslave you and oppress you for the rest of your life. But no, I'm here to tell you that it is time to release from spiritual bondage.